All right, here we go.
Being recorded.
Hi, everybody.
Look at all the people.
I know, I love it. This is a great.
Hi.
Welcome.
Welcome, Fed.
Hi, everyone.
Welcome,
Glad
Fed.
you're
We're going to
here.
give it a couple of more minutes. So if you want to grab a glass of water, a glass of wine, a beer, a whiskey.
All of the above.
This is why I love Elaine.
Yes.
Oh, there's Alex. Okay.
There's Alex. Awesome.
Yeah.
I allowed her in. Okay. I'm going to stop my video.
Alex, hey, say hi, do sound check, make sure we can hear you real good.
Hello.
Hey, Alex.
Oh, perfect.
Hey.
Great.
Hi, Mary.
Mary. Mary, we were wondering if you were the Mary that was in the list, but it just said Mary.
So was that, it was
No other
was
Mary
that
matters.
Mary,
Just
or
me, Mary.
which Mary is this? Yeah. Good to see you. Happy New Year, everybody.
So yeah, we are being recorded. You should have gotten a little notification when you joined. Just because I do want us to start at 6:30, so I'll just start doing a little bit of a pre-call now. My name is Elaine Campbell. For those of you who don't know me, the precinct chair, Dallas Democratic precinct chair. So thank you so very much for everyone who joined. Thank you so much for all the candidates. Obviously, one of the great things about HB 114 is that we have a lot of great candidates. So I'm really excited that we're able to have this forum because we get to hear everyone talk. Jennifer Owen is going to be the timekeeper. She will be unmuted. If you see, she has a sign that she signed that she stood up that says 1:30. And just for the candidates' knowledge, the way the forum will go, we're gonna have one initial intro question. It's a question, but everyone's gonna get 2 minutes to answer that question, and then we're gonna go into the forum questions. And for the forum questions, you have 90 seconds, a minute and a half, and then at the end, you'll have a closing that you can say, and that one will also be 2 minutes. So.
And I'm an imperfect human, so don't yell at me. If somebody gets like 2 seconds more than somebody else, it's not intentional.
Yeah.
And then I know there are a bunch of additional candidates at this meeting. Thank you everyone for coming, even candidates not in HG 114. So if any candidates would like to put their candidate link into the chat, everyone will get it that way.
Awesome. If everyone who is not talking other than Jennifer, if you could please go on mute as well, and the candidates, although you can go off and on and off mute. Everyone will have control of your mute button. If we notice that there's some noise or some background noise and we need to mute someone, then we will do that. But everyone does have control to go on and off mute as they would like to, and you also do have control to go on and off video if you would like to as well. So I think we can go ahead and get started. The very first question, and this is the one that you will have 2 minutes. Each of you will have 2 minutes. And the first question is, if you could please tell us why you feel the feds should vote for you. And just in alphabetical order, I will start with John Bryant.
Am I on?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be with the feds again, and I want to thank you for breathing life back into the Democratic Party in the last several years. We've not seen anything like the feds before this, and it's a great benefit to everybody. On December 10th, the Supreme Court rendered a decision called Whole Women's Health versus Right, in which they approved effectively the mechanism used by the Texas Legislature to deprive a woman of the constitutional right to make her own decision with regard to the ending of a pregnancy. As if that were not bad enough, as Justice Roberts said in his dissent, the same mechanism can now be used to interfere with any constitutional right. And as you know, the far right doesn't know any limits. I think we can see them now taking steps, and the next steps they'll take will begin to interfere with advocacy of the right of a woman to make a decision with regard to ending her pregnancy. So the job of feds in choosing a Democratic candidate for the legislature is more important this year than it ever has been before. I'd like to see the best public school system in Texas. I'd like to see a woman have a right to choose. I want to see a reliable electric grid. I want to see all of the things happen that we all share and hope for. But they will not happen unless we're able to win a majority in the Texas House of Representatives. My first priority is to use this great 2-to-1 Democratic district as a base for going out and winning a majority so that we can govern this state from a majority position in the Texas House of Representatives. That's why I'm asking feds to support me.
Thank you, John. Charlie?
Elaine, thanks so much. I think it's a great question. I want to thank everybody for having me here tonight, and I hope everybody's staying safe from the new Omicron variant. I'll say a few things about why I think you should vote for me to be your next state representative. First, I've got a record of service to this community. Ever since I moved back after law school in 2010, I've been in this community fighting to work and fighting for services for the homelessness, for those experiencing homelessness. I fought for equality and inclusion for all of my neighbors, including the LGBTQ plus community. And I fought for greater access to free legal services for all Dallasites. Next, I think I've got the right priorities. I want to get down to Austin so that we can restore reproductive rights and restore equality for women in this state. I want to get down to Austin so that we can expand Medicaid and address the maternal mortality crisis, as we have one of the highest maternal mortality rates, not just in the country, but in the world. And I also want to fund and defend our public schools. I want to fix our power grid by investing in more renewable energy. And I want to stand up to the senseless bullying of transgender and LGBTQ plus individuals in this state. And lastly, I can get the job done. I'm proud to be endorsed by Wendy Davis and Ambassador Ron Kirk, but moreover, I've got a record of getting people on my side to achieve progress for others, even when they may not have agreed with me at first. For instance, as president of the Young Lawyers, I had to work for over a year to get conservative members of our Dallas Young Lawyers Board to agree to a bylaws amendment that was historic for the LGBT community. We gave the Dallas LGBT Bar Association a full sister bar voting seat on our board in 2019. And that was the first time that's ever been done for an LGBT bar association here in Texas. I want to achieve the same kind of progress for all Texans in Austin. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Charlie. Alex?
Yeah, thank you, Elaine, and thanks to the feds. I think one of the great things about the feds is that it's always been about the community and about the people. And so that's why I want to continue this advocacy and asking for y'all's vote. I am running because of this community. I'm running and I feel that I'm the best fit to represent House District 114 because of my life experiences and because I can best relate and advocate for this community. It is 54% communities of color. I feel that my professional experiences also help me best advocate for this community as a prosecutor, and I was also a legislative liaison for the district attorney. And lastly, I also have been an activist here in Dallas for the past 11 years, and I've put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into this community that I love and that I call home. And everyone here, everyone in this community is my tribe. It's my family. I'm from Bogota, Colombia, and I moved here when I was 4. My parents brought me to this country for a chance at the American dream. I grew up undocumented, but my parents taught me the importance of an education, hard work, and giving back to my community. And that's what I grew up on. And I was lucky to become a citizen in 2013, the same year that I graduated from SMU Law School. And I was lucky that I was being able to pursue a career as a prosecutor, and I was able to advocate for my community for the past 8 years. I was a legislative liaison, so I have firsthand experience being able to pass and write bills down in Austin in the 2019 legislative session. And I've been able to be an activist, whether it's with nonprofits, whether it's with nonpartisan or even partisan organizations for the past 11 years. And I feel that that combination and that set of skills is what makes me unique and makes me the best fit to be able to go down to Austin and hit the ground running because we don't have a lot of time once you get elected. So I'm excited to be here, and I would be honored to be able to be the next state representative in House District 114.
Thank you, Alex. Chris?
Hi, thank you, Elaine. Thank you, Feds, and thanks to everyone for participating tonight. I really hope to be together in person. For those that don't know, my name is Chris Leal, and I'm a Dallas native, a public school teacher, I'm a union member, a first-generation college graduate, a lifelong progressive Democrat, and a proud Tejano whose family has lived in Texas for 300 years. I am running for HD 114 to make sure working Texans have progressive representation we need in the legislature, and to fight for the needs of my students, my families, our city, and our state. We need progressive Texas values in the Capitol, and we need representatives who aren't afraid to fight for them. Not only am I the best fighter for Dallas, I'm the only candidate who has released an extensive policy platform with over 6 ideas to tackle the problems of our time. Feds have done an amazing job at revitalizing Dallas politics, and I believe our campaign has the messaging and the vision to help build on the work the Feds have done to finally turn Texas blue again. If the recent years and recent legislative sessions have shown us anything, it's that not all Democrats are the same. The type of Democrat we elect matters. Dallas deserves bold Democratic leadership, and I'm running to provide leadership as bold as Texas. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. And Kendall?
Hi, how are you? Good to see you, Feds. You know, I'm just tickled to be here, and I want to thank y'all for going through all the work to help put this sucker together. Wish we could have done it in person. This isn't my first Feds meeting, right? I've been here since the beginning. I grew up in East Texas with 2 mamas, so if you had any questions on if I knew how to fight, that's your answer to it. When I was 11 years old, Republicans were writing bills to take kids like me out of our homes to put us in foster care. So for the last 20 years, I had been fighting every single day to make sure that no family is denied the basic human dignity that was denied to my family. You know I've been doing that because I've been in the trenches with you. I've been knocking on doors and making phone calls and registering voters with you. It didn't take an insurrection or Donald Trump. It took attacks on working families. And I've been in this fight for a while. That's why I think I earned your support. There's not going to be a whole lot of difference in us ideologically. We're all good Democrats, right? But when it comes down to it, I think when you're putting someone in a seat, as John described it, it's a 2-to-1 Democratic seat, who do you trust to do the right thing and to never back down from the fights that are important to us? You know I won't, because I went and argued for women's reproductive health down the barrels of shotguns in East Texas when I ran in the most conservative Senate district in the state of Texas back in 2018. People told me I was crazy, but I did it because Democrats have got to start putting up fights everywhere and stop conceding territory. You know I'm a team player. You know that if I get this seat, I'm going to work every day to make sure that we're building on the number of Democrats we have in the House to try to achieve that majority. And also, as an affordable housing professional, I look around and wonder why there are no affordable housing professionals in the whole legislature. I think I provide a perspective that isn't represented. That's what makes me unique, and that's why I think that the Fed should support me in the race. It's good to see you guys, and I'm glad to be in another forum with y'all.
Thank you, Kendall. So the next question is for John. This one is only specifically to John that was submitted. John, you served in the Texas House from 1974 to 1983, and you were in your 20s when you first served. What did you find lacking in the other 4 candidates that compelled you to run?
Well, I don't want to speak ill of any of the other candidates. They're all fine people. I do want to say that this district is 65% Democratic, almost 2-to-1. And I want to see us send somebody to Austin who is going to use the leverage of that kind of safety in the November elections to be on the cutting edge and be willing to advocate for the things that you and I, cause you and I to get involved in politics. Not only women's rights, not only the rights of gay people, which I've been fighting for since I was elected to the state legislature back when it was quite different. The environment was quite different, but also economic justice for all Texans. Fairness with regard to this payment of these fees for the electric grid, for example. Property taxes that are driving retired people out of their homes, causing them to sell the homes that they own because they can't pay the property taxes and move somewhere else. I want to see somebody who's going to go up there and talk about gun control. We've got to be able to get rid of these guns that are everywhere. And unless you have somebody who is not ambitious for higher office, not afraid of being unpopular, but willing to beard the line, so to speak, and raise these issues, we're going to have more of the same. So I'm asking you to send me down there. Let me use my experience to help build a majority in the Texas House so we can win these battles and lead these battles.
Thank you, John. This next question is for Alex, and for Alex only. So, Alex, the voting history of all of of most of the candidates suggests that there is a consistent history of voting in the Democratic primaries, but it's been noted that you voted in the Republican primaries in 2014 and 2016. And the question is if you could explain why you voted in the Republican primary in 2014 and 2016.
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually don't shy away from this. I've had really great meetings with a lot of people, and I've actually just had a meeting with John about it. We had coffee. And my voting history is really based on, honestly, democratic principles. It's on integrity and honesty and compassion. They were meaningful votes to me. I voted against a district attorney who I didn't think had qualities of integrity and honesty. And I voted for another candidate that I thought would have those qualities in office. And it had nothing to do, honestly, with a party affiliation. And so that was one vote. And I voted against Trump. It was a strategic vote. Both of them were. I voted for another candidate that I felt comfortable would not win Texas. It was also a protest vote that I felt just, you know, it was hard as an immigrant, as a woman, as a Latina. And I don't expect people to vote the same way I do. I just hope that people understand the reasons why. I hope as the Democratic Party, at least on my campaign, that we stand by the principle that we are the party of inclusion. And on my team, we are. And I hope that we can maintain positive campaigning. I know that on my team we do, because I know that after 11 years of activism, then when we go negative, it really turns voters away. So on my team, we will maintain positivity.
Thank you very much, Alex. So this is a question for everyone, and I'm going to go backwards and put in the alphabetical order this time. So we'll start with Kendall Scudder. So the question is, what are the top 2 issues that you will go to Austin to advocate for or on?
Yeah, voting rights in public schools. I mean, y'all heard me drone on forever about public schools in my 2018 race, and I'm not backing down from that. Permanent cost of living adjustments for our retired teachers, constitutional amendments to ban school vouchers, and ensuring that all of our property taxes that are paid for school districts are actually spent on school districts and not put in the general fund and spent on special projects like border walls. Making sure that we're fully funding our public schools is paramount to why I'm involved in politics. I would have had no opportunities in my life if I had not had access to a quality public school and those public school teachers that helped me along the way. But voting rights, I think, also takes the forefront here, because are we able to fight any of these issues if we aren't able to protect the right to vote? You know I will, because I was the private citizen who filed the criminal complaint against Ken Paxton, who was trying to take away your right to vote by mail during the pandemic. I wasn't afraid to stand up against the Attorney General whenever I was a private citizen, and I damn sure won't be afraid to do it if I'm a state legislator. You can count on me to always make sure that not only are we protecting your right to vote, but we're expanding access to the ballot box, making sure that we have online voter registration, not putting these barriers up to activists who are trying to register folks to vote, making sure that we're expanding access to mail-in ballots, making sure that we are making it easier for people to vote and not harder. So those are going to be my two largest priorities. But of course, there's a laundry list of issues that are important to all of us. But to me, protecting voting rights and fully funding our public schools are my priorities.
Thank you, Kendall. Chris, Leal, what are your top two?
Thanks, Elaine. So my top two issues, well, as a public school teacher with a professional background in finance and economics, school finance has to be my top priority. The state has been defunding its share of education for years. There's been some recent activity in the legislature, but I think it's been inadequate. And as a result of this defunding of their share of the education budget, it's put strain on municipal budgets. It's hurt our educators and our students. Texas has one of the lowest per pupil funding rates in the entire country. And it's put strain on, as I said, with our municipal budgets and thus our property taxpayers. And so the way we pay for education also matters. So we need to make sure that we're fixing our Robin Hood and recapture systems to make sure that all districts can meet strong teacher pay minimums and per pupil funding levels. And my second priority, is a collection of things that would help build stronger and healthier communities in Texas. The chief one of those would be voting rights. Our campaign has released a top 10 in 10 program. Texas is dead last in voter turnout, and we should set a goal to take Texas into the top 10 of voting states in the next 10 years. We can do it. There's a list of policies that can help us in that goal. But as part of rebuilding stronger and healthier communities, we also need Medicaid expansion, protecting reproductive rights, and empowering Texas workers to fight 50 years of flat wages.
Thank you. And Alex, what are your top two?
So education is definitely on the top of my list, ensuring that we're funding it as it's constitutionally mandated at 50%. I am only here because I had access to a great public school, but that should not be determined by the zip code that you live in. I also want to make sure that we are funding English language learners as well. That isn't funded at the level that it needs to be. This district is 32% Hispanic, so I also want to make sure that we are addressing our districts and the needs that it needs, the students and the families as well. Reproductive justice is something that I'm also very adamant about, and that is ensuring that we have access to not only an abortion, but access to sexual contraception and access to sexual education. I believe that without access to all three, we are doing women and communities a disservice, and especially communities of low socioeconomic status. And unfortunately, that does become communities of color. And so without giving access to reproductive justice, those communities have a huge disservice. And again, this district particularly can be affected when we don't advocate for those three things. So I'm a big advocate of that. One kind of little tangent about in that is access to just healthcare in general. So an expansion of Medicaid is something that I know we can accomplish and something that's extremely important in this district.
Thank you, Alex. And Charlie?
Thanks, Elaine. I'll tell you, I have two issues that are really the top two things that got me into this race that I'm going to work on, and you can trust that I'll work on them because they're personal to me. The first is restoring reproductive rights for women and for anybody with a uterus in this state. In May, Rachel and I had our first 8-week appointment the day after Governor Abbott signed the heartbeat bill. We found out that our child had stopped growing at 6 weeks and that it didn't have a heartbeat. I've been in that doctor's office for Governor Abbott and where Dan Patrick think they belong. I can assure you they don't belong there. I will fight and scratch and claw to get every inch of women's reproductive rights and for reproductive rights for all back in Texas, no matter what the Supreme Court does later this year. Secondarily, I'm in this race because of the relentless and senseless attacks on the LGBTQ plus community. We have neighbors a street over here in our neighborhood, Casa Linda Forest, Rachel and Frank Gonzalez, who have a transgender daughter. 75 bills were offered last summer attacking the LGBTQ plus community. 52 of them were targeted at transgender youth. It's disgusting, it's despicable, it's not Texan, and I will fight, scratch and claw to stop every single bill that comes up next session, because you know they're coming for the LGBT community next.
Thank you, Charlie. And John, what would be your top 2 issues?
You're muted, John.
Thank you. I would endorse all of the priorities that have been articulated. My priority issue is public education, because with public education, we win the debate on all the other issues. We're 43rd in the nation. It's a scandal that we're a state as wealthy as we are is 43rd in the nation in per pupil expenditures. That should be changed. I was named one of the 10 best legislators in Texas twice by Texas Monthly, because I became an expert in public school finance, which is quite complicated. I'll do that again if I'm there in order to engage meaningfully in this debate. But the primary priority I have is to lead an effort, if I can win this nomination, immediately begin raising money and traveling and advocating to win a majority of Democrats in the Texas House of Representatives, because we win or lose our progressive agenda on the first day with the first vote for Speaker, who is all powerful, appoints all the committees and sets the agenda. And unless we win that fight, unless we get a majority, all of our hopes and dreams are going to be put on hold until 2 more years when we'll have another chance. So that's my primary priority, and that's where I'll turn my attention immediately upon winning this nomination, if I'm so fortunate to do that.
Thank you, John. So the next question will be a good one, because all of you did mention education. The next question that came in was, what role do you think charter schools should have in Texas publication, in the Texas publication education system? I will go to Charlie Gearing first.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I want to state first and foremost, unequivocally, I am an unequivocal supporter of public education in our public schools. I am the product of great public schools myself, and I think everybody should have access to the same great public education that I had. Charter schools present 2 issues, right? First, they arguably drain money from the public education system, but and they also don't have the same regulations related to teachers and workforce regulations and things like that. I would say, look, charter schools can fill some gaps in rural communities and underserved communities, perhaps, as long as they're accountable and as long as they're regulated. But efforts by extremist Republicans to use charters as a tool to undermine the public education system and access to public education for every Texan, no matter their income level, I resist that completely. I oppose that completely. I'm a strong advocate for public education.
Thank you. And next, Alex.
Yeah, so I'm going to oppose any kind of funding or any kind of legislation that's going to go towards charter schools. Again, I'm a public school kid. That's how I learned English, actually. There's actually even studies that show that kids of color and diversity are disproportionately disciplined in charter schools. And so we have less accountability and less transparency within charter schools. So when we are in a district that is majority minority, we have 32% Hispanic, 14% African American, 6.8% Asian, and our kids are going to potentially go into charter schools that wouldn't have as much transparency or accessibility. I don't want to know or hear stories about potentially kids of color being disciplined at higher rates. So I want to make sure that we put all our money towards our public schools, making sure that I know that DISD has gone towards less of a disciplining of taking students out of in-school suspensions. So I want to make sure that we follow this track that I know is working really well in DISD. So that's where I want to put my time and money and effort into if I was elected.
Thank you, Alex. And Chris Leal.
So I am a product of all Texas public schools and institutions. Every institution I've ever been to has been in Texas and has been publicly based. And point blank, I don't think charters have any role in should have any role in our public education system. Charters are privately run institutions that take money away from our public schools, and I don't think there's anything arguable about that. I think if you want to have a privately run or operated school, then you should create a private school. The proliferation of charters is yet another way we've been taking money away from our public schools in recent years. And our campaign has released, and the only one to do so, released a proposal to place a moratorium on all new charter schools and to create a commission to study how to resolve existing charters.
Thank you, Chris. And Kendall Scudder.
Well, just because a campaign hasn't put a graphic out today doesn't mean that a campaign hasn't been talking about issues, right? I've been talking about a moratorium on charter schools for the last 4 or 5 years. And I'll say my issue with charter schools is more than twofold, but there are 3 big core issues that I think need to be addressed before the discussion on charter schools even happens. Number one, there's no transparency with the way that funds are being spent in charter schools. Your tax dollars are being spent in the shadows. That's unacceptable. Number two, there's no accountability, or they don't have the same academic standards and academic accountability that our public schools do. Number three, they don't have the same teacher accreditation standards. I remember when I was in school at Sam Houston State, a good state public school, I had classmates who didn't have bachelor's degrees that were teaching at the local charter school, right? So there are a lot of problems that we would have. Now, do charter schools that exist fill gaps where they're needed? Sometimes the state doesn't move fast enough. And so there are charter schools there to fill those gaps, but it is not a permanent solution. It is not a replacement for public schools. And I would say charter schools are pretty detrimental in rural communities. As someone who grew up in a rural community and spent most of my life in a rural community, I can tell you that charter schools don't benefit. Public schools are often the #1 employer in rural communities. And I think that we need to wholeheartedly support our public schools and do everything that we can to make sure that our local community public schools are well funded. And that is not by taking money out of them for charter schools or for vouchers that are just entitlement programs for rich folks.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kendall. So this is another topic that all of you have touched on, and it's a little bit of an extensive question. So
John didn't get the education question.
Oh, I'm sorry, John. I apologize. Thank you so much for keeping me straight with that. And for John, if you could please answer.
Okay.
My apologies.
That's fine. I am not a supporter of the charter school movement. I think charter schools detract from the ability to finance public schools. There's no community in our state that doesn't have a public school, and there's no public school that can't be excellent if it's appropriately funded. And when you're 43rd in the nation in per pupil expenditures, you're not doing a good job of funding your public schools. I don't want to support vouchers for private schools. I don't want to support charter schools. I don't want to support anything that detracts from our public school system. I think the whole movement toward privatization in so many areas has proven not to be successful. In fact, the studies indicate public schools generally do a better job than charter schools do at educating our students. So I think we should turn a deaf ear to pleas for more money to be drained out of the public school system to help these private activities.
Thank you. Thank you very much, John. And again, my apologies. I certainly didn't mean to leave anyone out. So I will go on to the next question. And again, all of you did touch on this slightly. So the question is, the Supreme Court is threatening gutting Roe v. Wade, and our state, Texas, has already taken away a great deal of access to safe and legal abortion care, which until 6 months ago was protected as a right. So what specifically would you do to fight for access to safe and legal abortion rights, and how far do you think those rights should extend? And I will start with Alex.
Yeah, so I mean, I will do everything I can to repeal SB 8, and if anything, I'm going to go as far as trying to repeal certain parts of it. I don't know if I mentioned earlier, while I was in the district attorney's office, I was specifically assigned to the sex assault unit, and I worked on the backlog of the rape kits. So definitely something that I want to at least focus on, if not the entire bill, is definitely repealing the part where those who are victims or survivors of rape and incest is definitely a part that I want to repeal. I have held the hands of those survivors, and so they absolutely deserve to have a constitutional right to have an access to a safe and legal abortion. Nobody down in Austin should be taking away that right for them. So that is something that I specifically want to do because again, we are talking about a majority minority. So when we were talking about repealing an entire bill, if anything, I want to piecemeal that bill. And I do think that there is movement for that. And so I think that definitely that is one thing that I want to do if elected is go after that specific part of the bill. And like I mentioned earlier, access to affordable and accessible sexual contraception and sexual education, this reproductive justice movement is extremely, extremely important to our community here in House District 114.
Thank you. And Chris Leal?
I believe that abortion should be safe, legal, and accessible. Abortion access and reproductive rights generally are healthcare, and they need to be made available to anyone who needs them in all circumstances, in all ages. Texas has one of the highest teen pregnancy rates in the country, right? Our campaign is proud to have been supported by numerous Planned Parenthood advocates, and our campaign has been volunteering at Planned Parenthood for months to assemble thousands of pregnancy kits for those in need. I obviously believe we must repeal SB 8. The recent abortion ban passed this session, but we must go further. I believe we need to, we have proposed creating a Patient Trust Act to protect and strengthen the patient-provider relationship, to ensure that these healthcare decisions are determined by the patient and their provider and not by politicians in Austin. I believe we should also go back to allowing Planned Parenthood to participate in Medicaid and other state healthcare programs.
Thank you, Chris. Kendall Scudder?
I mean, I do think it's quite a problem that we keep asking dudes what their opinions on abortion are. I mean, honestly, I don't particularly like the idea that the government has their nose in that aspect of your hospital room as it is. That decision is between a person who is pregnant and their doctor, and that is not a decision for me to make. So you can count me in on any efforts to try to repeal SB 8 and to try to go on the offensive. That's an issue that I think that we often forget. We've got to get Democrats off the defense and put them on the offense, because the way that we've been on the defense for years is getting our butts kicked. And it's pretty gross. I think that if the Democrats go on the offense and plan the way that Republicans do, we could hedge a lot of this off. Republicans have been fighting this fight for 50 years. They needed one judge to make a bad ruling, and they got it. We should be doing the exact same thing to make sure we're expanding abortion rights, but we can also do that on issues like voting rights, on public school issues, things that are important to us. We've got to get on the offensive and get off the defense. So I said this whenever I was arguing with Senator Hall in Canton, Texas, back in the 2018 election. I think that not only should we make sure that we're expanding access to abortion, we should make sure that folks have access to contraception. We should be teaching age-appropriate sex education in public schools. If your goal is to reduce the number of abortions, that's the only way that's been proven to work. And Democrats need to make sure we're standing firm there and fighting hard on not making compromises on these types of values that are important to us.
Thank you, Kendall. And John?
Well, like the other candidates, I believe that a woman is the only one who should make this decision, and I would not put any governmental restrictions on her ability to make any decision she feels is appropriate, hopefully with the advice of her doctor. And I want to make sure that we allow this process to move forward in such a way that safe abortions are available to any woman who decides she needs one. I have voted this way repeatedly, both in the state legislature and in the U.S. Congress. I've also voted to allow women who must go to get their health care from publicly funded sources to be entitled to an abortion as well, including women who serve in the military. This has been quite a debate in the past when Republicans tried to restrict that. I have a record, and what many of the speakers have spoken about what they plan to do. But with regard to this, our gay rights, LGBT privileges, protecting them, with regard to issue of guns, it doesn't matter. I have a record that I compiled over 24 years of public service. I'm anxious to go back into battle and advocate not only the things that we've spoken about here, but many others that we will not have time to deal with.
Thank you, John. And Charlie?
Thanks, Elaine. I agree. The first thing we have to do, and I think there may be Republicans on the other side of the aisle that may meet us there, is carving out an exception or creating a defense under SB 8 for rape, incest, and for the health and safety of a mother. And this issue is personal to me. Like I said, my wife had to undergo a DNC procedure back in May. Those procedures, many doctors across the state are not providing those procedures anymore out of fear for being sued. So it is vital that we get an exception for the health and safety of the mother. I also believe that Roe v. Wade, while Roe v. Wade is the law of the land and should stand as the law of the land, I tend to share Secretary Buttigieg's view that a woman's right to choose an abortion extends beyond the first trimester. And I would support codification of either Roe v. Wade or some greater right to abortion access or choice in state law so that women are protected no matter what the Supreme Court does. I'll also add, the other folks are absolutely right. We have to support and fund Planned Parenthood, sex education, access to contraceptives. My wife and I toured the Dallas Planned Parenthood facility in November, and we have been active supporters of Planned Parenthood.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. So the next question is one we haven't touched on much tonight, but I know all of you have opinions on and have stated them in other forums. Do you see a path towards criminal law reform in the next session, and how would you work to make that happen? This time, the first person I will go to is Chris Leal.
Thank you, Elaine. And I appreciate the wording you guys used there, using criminal law instead of criminal justice, because too often I think that's a misappropriate term to use here. And look, short answer is yes, I believe there is a path in this session, every session. Some of these criminal justice reform issues have support on both sides of the aisle. They're bipartisan. It's not necessarily a left versus right thing. Texas has one of the largest incarceration rates in the country, and Texas has the largest, and the United States has the largest incarcerated rate in the world. If Texas was its own population, its own state again, we would have the largest incarceration rate of any other country in the entire world. So this absolutely has to be something that is a priority for us. We put out proposals to put a moratorium on for-profit prisons. We need to legalize recreational marijuana and simultaneously expunge all qualifying previous convictions related to that. We have a lot of work to do on this issue.
Thank you, Chris. Kendall?
Yeah, I spent a lot of time in Huntsville, Texas by choice. I went to school there. And when I was there, I was very active in politics and ran for city council and got to tour the death chambers there. And let me tell you what, it was striking and something that, will live with me forever. I'll never forget those moments. Criminal justice was something in that community that we just talked about on the reg. Because TDCJ was based there, right? And I've had a lot of opportunities to sit down with leaders in AFSCME and talk to prison workers about, what they're seeing happening in their facilities. And, I bring all this up because I want to talk about a case that just recently pushed through where we were trying to make sure that we're getting AC in prison units, not just for the people who are there, but also for the folks who are working there, and how the state spent more money to fight it than it would have cost just to do it. It's a common theme that happens when we're discussing these types of issues in the state. Not only should we be fighting to be more humane as a state, we should push to make sure we're eliminating qualified immunity, that we're eliminating cash bail, and no conversation about criminal justice reform, if you're going to call it justice, is going to be complete unless you talk about recreational marijuana and how we should be legalizing that in the state. But not only doing that, but making sure we're expunging records of folks that we've chosen to incarcerate for that nonviolent offense. Criminal justice issues should take high priorities in our minds because we fail to have a just society as a whole when we treat even one person unfairly in our judicial system.
Thank you, Kendall. John, Bryant?
Well, I think this is one area where we can make meaningful progress. There are Republicans who have felt the sting of the injustice of our criminal justice system and would like to see changes made. So I think that's going to take some significant skill and ability to reach across the aisle on an issue that holds some promise. Our prison system is a scandal. The idea that we don't have air conditioning in these prisons is really beyond belief. It is just indicative of the fact that we make our prison system crime factories instead of crime preventers that can educate people and give them a chance when they get back out on the street. Our sentences are too long for nonviolent offenders. I agree that recreational marijuana should be legal and we should expunge the records of those who've been convicted in the past. And I think I would again appeal to you that this kind of issue can be handled in such a way that we can succeed with it and actually mark up a success if we have experienced people that know how to go down and fight hard on all the issues that we disagree with the Republicans about that we've talked about tonight, and at the same time be collegial enough to work with them on things where we can find common ground. That's the way it was when I served there the last time. That's not the way it is now. I'd like to change that.
Thank you, John. And Charlie?
Thanks, Elaine. I'll say this, I really support eliminating cash bail. I think Republicans obviously had bail reform on their mind. They just went in the wrong direction last session and made it more onerous, made it tougher on folks, and made it more likely that if you are poor, you will stay in jail or that you will plead guilty to a crime that you are not guilty of committing. These are basic fundamental rights that we must reform. We must reform and eliminate cash bail to protect. We also need to decriminalize marijuana. I agree, expunging records for offenders is also just. We also need to restore voting rights for felons after they're released from prison. I've worked for years in this community, bringing greater access to legal services to many of our neighbors. And I tell you that there is a whole subset of folks in this city, in this state, that simply cannot afford a lawyer or any access to solving their legal problems. And we need a more just society here in Texas that provides more access, whether it's in the criminal or civil context. Many people get into cycles of poverty, get into crime because they are put there by these basic inequities and by things like systemic racism.
Thank you, Charlie. And Alex?
Yes, thank you. So I actually have experience in passing criminal law reform. I went down to the 2019 session and helped under District Attorney Judge Crusoe. And you'd be surprised on finding bipartisan support on a lot of this. People want to find ways to help individuals on decriminalizing those who are experiencing poverty, those who are experiencing mental health issues, those who are experiencing substance abuse issues. And we especially found that as a prosecutor, where we want to help those who are experiencing that, those our neighbors who are experiencing homelessness. And so when we are able to approach the criminal justice system under that purview, and we can then approach the legislative system in that way, that is how we find comprehensive criminal law reform. And I think a lot of the times we only look at the police department and find that that's the only, kind of leg of the criminal justice system that we should look at. But as a prosecutor, I know that I had a lot of power and discretion. So we can also look at prosecutors and the penal code and the criminal justice system in that sense, and the prison systems as one, probation and parole, the mental health departments, the substance abuse providers, and the appellate court systems, and all of that in my experience. And that's what I add to the table here, is that I can really jump into a legislative session, hit the ground running, and know exactly how to pass great legislation when it comes to criminal law reform.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for those those answers. So this is the next question. After having worked on legislation in the last session, it became clear that representatives for the Texas House need to be financially literate. The budget for the state of Texas is huge, and representatives need to have experience with finances and a reasonable level of financial education to craft laws that work. Please tell us what experiences you have had with handling a business budget and a business principle that you have learned that helped you prepare for serving in the Texas legislature. So we will start with Kendall.
That's a great question, actually. I do think it's important that we have people who have a track record of managing budgets in the legislature. I own a small business, right? And so whenever you got to make a payroll, you got to run a budget. And we've done pretty well at it. And so my livelihood is running budgets. But also when you elected me to serve as your state Democratic Executive Committee man, for the last 4 years, I served on the SDEC as an elected official there. And I was appointed by the chairman to serve on the Finance Committee, where I helped oversee the Texas Democratic Party's budget. And let me tell you, there were some problems there, guys. And that's why I led the charge to start overhauling the way that TDP does its finances, and helped work with the operations team to implement a lot of the changes that we had in place in order to help with reconciliation of the budgets, and to have appropriate structure in place with regards to transparency in the way that we operate. Because that budget operated with a committee. I mean, we had a committee of 100 folks, but our finance committee put it together. And we wanted to make sure that we had transparency in the way that it was operated. And so that was a charge that I led. So I have quite a bit of experience with running some pretty big old budgets, not just personal budgets, but also with our state party. And I think that I bring a lot to the table there whenever we start to have those conversations.
Thank you, Kendall. John, Bryant?
Well, I am a chairman, or rather CEO of a telecommunications company, and so I know the business end of budgeting, but I would beg to differ with the premise of the question. The handling of a governmental budget bears almost no relationship to the operation of a business. I was on the budget committee of the U.S. House of Representatives for 3 terms. No one is allowed to serve more than 3 terms, at least at that time. And I know what it is to handle a budget the size of the United States government. In Austin, I was on the education committee, and as I told you before, purposely made myself an expert in public school finance, and education is more than half of the discretionary budget at the state level. So I understand budgeting in government. It is a statement really of who we are. So it was quite disappointing to me last time to see so many Democrats vote for a budget that actually reduced the state spending at a time in which we're, as I said before, 43rd in the nation in per capita, rather per pupil spending in public education. I'll take my experience with this with me there. I'll use it as leverage to try to achieve the progressive goals that we've talked about, and try to bring into clear focus the fact that this very wealthy state can afford to do more. And that's where I'll be focusing my efforts.
Thank you, John. And Charlie?
Thanks, Elaine. I'll tell you, I have a long history managing budgets. I was not just the president of the Dallas Young Lawyers in 2019, but I was on the executive committee of that organization for 5 years. That's a 3,000 member professional organization here in town with a budget, an annual budget approaching $500,000. And so I was there every January, where we went through a lengthy reconciliation process, managing requests from over 30 subcommittees for funding, and then managing our expenditures, not just at the beginning of the year, but throughout the year. I did the same thing with the DOL Foundation as its chair in 2017, leading that foundation to award the highest number of grants to legal nonprofits in North Texas in its history. And further, I'm a partner at a small law firm here in East Dallas. I've been sending invoices to clients for years, and also been helping manage my firm's finances now as a partner. And so, but I will also add, I agree that we can't treat the government's budget or the state's budget like a business budget. Extremists elected Donald Trump in 2016, and what did we get? Historic deficits and skyrocketing irresponsible spending. So I agree that we can't look at it that way, but I definitely bring some financial wherewithal to the job, and I'm ready to get involved.
Thank you, Charlie. And Alex?
Yeah, so I'm going to answer that in two parts, my experience and also who has a seat at the table based on my experience as a legislative liaison. I've had experience managing different budgets based on just different organizations that I've worked on. The Dallas Association of Young Lawyers, I worked on a committee where we had events and we raised monies for nonprofits. So we managed either how much money we raised, so we can know either how much we could afford on the event, as well as how much money we raised. I have my own law firm now, so I'm managing that business as well. And I agree with John in the sense of, you can manage a really good budget as a business, but at the end of the day, it depends on who has a seat at the table. And so you can look at the money, but at the end of the day, the community has to trust on how that person is going to spend the money. And I think that this district needs to trust the representative and decide, is that person going to make the best decision for our community? And I think that that's really what you're trying to ask, is that we can all figure out how to manage a budget, but the community has to trust that our representative, and I'm saying that it's me because it's my life experiences, it's my professional experiences, and that I put my blood, sweat, and tears into this community, and I will always make the best decision for the people in House District 114.
Thank you, Alex. And Chris?
Thank you for the question. So I think probably more so than any of the other candidates, this is something where my specialty is in my background. I have degrees in finance and economics. Before I was a teacher, I had a business career that took me to New York and allowed me to help manage $40 billion company and put me in boardrooms with CEOs and CFOs, put me in rooms to argue with hedge fund managers, and allowed me to work on $billion acquisition transactions. But knowing all that and having that experience, I would also agree that you're not going to run a state like a business. And I don't believe that finance is the ultimate thing here. I actually believe my personal passion, economics, is really what really rules the day and makes a difference here. Sure, you might read a budget and pass legislation to spend money on something, but what is the impact of that money going to do? What is the knock-on impact? What is the derivative? How do you keep the economic machine working? How do you stimulate it? How do you fix the economic issues of our time? I think economics is one of the most important things for any public servant to understand, and I am very proud to have a background in it, and it drives all of my policy decisions.
Thank you very much. I'm going to move on to the next question. The next question is, what can be done in the legislature to support creating more affordable housing, specifically in the Dallas area? And we will start with John Bryant.
Again, when we talk about the budget, we're talking about what our priorities are. If housing is a priority, then funds will flow toward affordable housing. Housing will only be a priority if the Democrats can gain a majority in the House of Representatives and in the Senate. Those kinds of priorities can only be served if we decide that our objective is not simply talking among ourselves about things that we all already agree on, but our objective is taking this district, which is a 2-to-1 Democratic district, and sending someone out there with this nomination that's going to lead an effort statewide to win that majority so we can address the needs of public housing, which the bottom line of which is a matter of funding. We might also say a matter of incentives, but ultimately that's funding as well. So I want to tie all of these issues back to that. We can deal with the need for housing. We can deal with homelessness and the need to find a way to take care of homeless people as well as people with low income that can pay for their housing. But it just takes a decision to make our state government like the other large states a part of this solution.
Thank you, John. And Charlie?
Thanks, Elaine. I'd say first and foremost, the Texas Department of Housing and Community Affairs Code needs to be updated and reformed. That code has not been touched in over 30 years. That is the code that incentivizes and governs the construction and development of affordable housing. That needs to be updated. As an advocate for our neighbors serving, our neighbors experiencing homelessness over the past 10 years, I can tell you this is a huge issue across the city of Dallas and here in East Dallas, for sure. We need to also focus on building affordable housing that caters to a spectrum of socioeconomic levels. So not just focusing on building Section 8 housing or building, housing for a certain economic strata, but projects like the recent one that the city of Dallas just approved. That's a spectrum of socioeconomic options within that development. So I'd also like to work with our city council members. I think Paul Ridley is a big thought leader on this. I've spoken with his wife, Joan, and with Paul about this. And this is a huge, huge issue for all the citizens of East Dallas.
Thank you, Charlie. And Alex?
Yeah, I'm going to save a little time. I'm going to echo a little bit of what they've said. I think a big part of this as well is building better coalitions with our city and our county commissioners about who we are building relationships with when it comes to developers and the builders that come into our districts, because that is essentially what is creating a large part of our problems when it comes to affordable housing. I know that up and down a lot of these streets on Ross, on Live Oak, that apartments are being built. I know some of it in Development. I know, Elaine, I've talked to you about this, is that if we don't start at the initial problem of who these developers are and the contracts that are being made, then we're not addressing the root of the problem. And I know that Charlie talked a little bit about this, that we just had this $72 million project that allows for better affordable housing to address our neighbors experiencing homelessness. So if we continue to build these relationships at either a city and a state level or a county and a state level, then we can really address the root of the problem and create a better spectrum so that we can create better affordable housing, especially when when we know that people have been impacted because of the pandemic and especially because of the winters on top of that.
Thank you, Alex. Chris?
So we've seen a lot, as some other people have mentioned. Dallas and the state and the country is no stranger to all these projects where we spend millions of dollars to build affordable housing and it produces like $1,000 a month studio apartments. And for whatever reason, it keeps not working. We keep throwing money at it. And it's because of the limitations of our, the economics of the situation, of the tax code and cost of construction. And so we really have to start thinking outside of the box. And so yet again, our campaign has put out an extensive list of policy solutions here. We need to be encouraging community land trusts, state funding to create municipal land bank programs that will allow organizations to provide truly affordable and sub-market rate rents. We need property tax circuit breaker rules that other states have had in place for 50 years to help make sure that people, their tax bills aren't pushing people out of their homes. We need tenants' rights and renters' rights. Right? This is a huge deal with foreclosure crisis. We need sources of income for cause and right to cure protections. We also need to create commissions. We want to create a commission to bring municipal leaders within Dallas and the state legislators together to study urban zoning and regulations so that we can increase housing supply and density in an environmentally friendly way that also mends the racial histories of construction that we've had in our past.
Thank you, Chris. And Kendall?
Really appreciate this question. I've spent the bulk of my life working professionally in affordable housing. And so I could give you an earful, but I only got an hour. I only got a minute and a half. So look, Chris was very correct in the discussion about affordable housing where they make you live in a 600 square foot studio apartment for $1,500 a month. there's not a lot of discussion being had on what these affordable housing companies how they need to be held accountable, and how we need to change what they're allowed to do to maintain their nonprofit statuses. Right now, you'll find a company that has a handful of LIHTCs, a handful of HUDs, and most of their bulk of their communities are conventional, but they don't have to pay taxes, right? Because they were able to meet their weird little thresholds that were set years ago, back in the 80s or so, and nobody has actually adjusted that. So I think beyond discussions of HUD and LIHTC, I don't think commissions and committees are what solve these problems. That's actually one of the big problems that we're facing, is that a lot of electeds don't understand housing. And so they always say, well, then we'll just create a committee to deal with that. They put a bunch of people in a committee and no one ever comes back to it. We need to have some real tangible solutions for people. I think the 4 millennials in this race can testify about how hard it is to buy a home, not just if you're an indigent community, but if you're in that bracket where, we're doing fine for ourselves, but good grief, I live in Junius Heights. There's no planet I could buy a home here. What are we doing to make sure that we're providing, abatements on the actual land beneath the home in areas that are unaffordable? Because sometimes you can afford to build a home, but sorry, I know I have to stop, but it's a very complicated discussion, and I hope we can have more discussion on it sooner down the road.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. We will go on to the next question. So one of the things that we have seen, especially with the pandemic, are the holes and challenges with which already existed, but they've been highlighted with our public health system. So what would you do to strengthen our public health system beyond just expanding Medicaid, which we know that we would all support? What else would you do to strengthen our public health system? This time we will start with Charlie.
Thanks, Elaine. I appreciate the question. I think you're right. The first step is expanding Medicaid, obviously. We need to bring our federal tax dollars home to work for us. But in addition to that, I think a crisis in this state is our maternal mortality rate. And so I would support many of the momnibus programs from the federal bill. For instance, extending postpartum access to postnatal care up to 24 months. We got an extension up to 6 months last legislative cycle, but that's not nearly enough. We also need to fund greater access to prenatal care. I would support targeted programs to help mothers or anybody carrying a child have access to healthcare as early as possible in their pregnancy, because I've talked to doctors in the district that tell me women walk into the emergency room like a ticking time bomb because they've had an unaddressed medical issue that they should have seen a doctor for months before, and it's because of inequities and inaccessibility in our system.
Thank you. Thank you. Alex?
Yeah, so in addition to just expanding Medicaid, I think one of the biggest things we can do is putting more money and funding into preventative healthcare measures, and especially for communities of color, and providing access to different languages. I know that I help and have been in contact with an organization here in Dallas, and they're in other places, called Biconcilio, and they go into the community and provide educational services, and they also provide it in Spanish as well. And they even go out and provide information about the vaccine. There was a recent story in the Dallas Morning News about how one of the highest rates of children who don't have the vaccine also correlate with highest rates of asthma. And so that was also correlating with zip codes of individuals of low socioeconomic status. And that was correlating with the fact that they don't have access to preventative healthcare measures. And so that's something that I think that if we put a lot of focus and funding into that we can reduce higher rates of emergency care, and that can also put a lot of impact into our hospitals. I think after everything that we have seen and put our healthcare workers into, we have got to put more pay for our nurses, for our staff, for the janitorial staff, for all of the staff that are working in our hospitals. They are put under so much pressure. They need more staffing as well as just salary increase in that. And I think that that can alleviate a lot of what's going on in our healthcare facilities.
Thank you, Alex. Chris?
So look, Texas is last place in healthcare coverage, right? And Dallas has the second highest uninsured rate of any large city, nearly 20%. So we have a lot of work to do in this in Texas and Dallas. But I think we also should be careful about the wording of the question to assume that everyone would support Medicaid expansion, because not every Democrat in the legislature has fought for this. Look, ultimately, solutions, I think, it's universal coverage at a federal level. But until we get to there, until DC gets their act together, we should be expanding our state programs as much as possible. So that includes expanding Medicaid to 138% of the federal poverty limit as proposed. We have to go further to expand income thresholds to 300% of the federal poverty level for all children's and pregnant women's programs that are under that Medicaid umbrella, which are not currently being talked about. We should also expand Medicaid coverage for mental health and substance abuse treatment. But we need to go further and make sure we're putting in cost effectiveness measures in Medicaid. That's like expanding value-based payments and going after provider fraud, which there is a lot of in our system, not the consumer side, the provider side. On private healthcare, we should be putting safeguards in place on private healthcare products like coverage standards, margin and expense caps, and transparency requirements. And of course, we also need paid family and sick and medical leave for all of our workers, inclusive of LGBTQIA+.
Thank you, Chris. Kendall?
I agree wholeheartedly with most of everything that my opponents all said on their questions here. On the topic of expanding Medicaid, I do think it's important to talk about ways that legislators could work to expand Medicaid, even if you can't do it for the whole state. There was a group of legislators in San Antonio in the last session who got together, and they were able to expand Medicaid for a hospital that served military personnel in San Antonio. We could do that as a Dallas County delegation and try to fight to get that done in Dallas if we couldn't do it for the whole state. The discussion on maternal mortality is very important. The persistent women here in East Dallas, I've read their whole report that they put together and delivered to the legislature in the last cycle. I know Rosie and her mama worked really hard on that, as well as that group there. And it was jaw-dropping that we have third world levels of maternal mortality rates here in Texas that aren't being addressed. But whenever I was running for Senate in 2018 and I was out in rural East Texas and I met with tons of law enforcement officials, every single one of them told me that their number one concern was mental health care. That was their number one challenge that they were facing. And I think that we really have to dive head in on this discussion of what can we do to help solve a lot of these problems that we're facing from the base. Why are a lot of these people having to constantly go into ER rooms over and over and over again because they aren't getting the preventative care that they need from the beginning? What can we do as a state to start investing in that type of preventative medicine? I think expanding access to paid family leave is also a crucial part of this as well. And I think that ties in with preventative medicine. Hope that helps you.
Thank you, Kendall. And John?
Well, thank you, Elaine. I don't think it's helpful to repeat what everybody else has already said, all of which I agree with, all of which all of us agree with. The point that I want to make is that this conversation will never take place in Austin with the Republicans in a majority in the House or the Senate. I mean, this is just an academic conversation unless we get serious about our politics. The state of California, the state of New York, which are the large states in the other three large states in the United States, are deeply into healthcare. In Austin, since time immemorial, this has not been an area in which conservative lawmakers were willing to involve the state government. We have a budget of about $250 billion, about $135 billion of it is discretionary spending. And it was actually cut by 5% with all the needs that we have. Obviously, I'm for as much of Medicaid funding as we can make our citizens eligible for. I want to get as much as possible. I want to do all the things that we just heard articulated, but we've got to send somebody, give somebody this nomination that's going to go out and join in and help lead an effort to restore a Democratic majority to the House of Representatives, or all the things that we talk about will never happen and will really never even be debated.
Thank you, John. Okay, we'll go on to the next question. Comes This is the time. Okay, we do have time for that next question. So this is also related to the pandemic. So during the pandemic, from Clay Jenkins to Greg Abbott, we saw a dramatic exercise of emergency powers. How should this be addressed in the next legislative session? And we will start with Alex.
Like, that's kind of a vague question. I mean, in the role of a state legislator, for me personally, I'm going to support my city council members, county judge, my school board trustees to make their own decisions individually as they see fit in their own avenues, and especially when it comes to safety measures. I think it's really important that that coalition is strong. I mean, I think that we saw that here in Dallas, and it was really great. In terms of the emergency powers, it's really unfortunate that we saw a governor take such drastic measures that were for political rhetoric and for just cheap political points, and it came to a detriment for people's lives. And we saw other states that didn't do that, and they were better off. You know, so as a state legislator, you know, that all I can do is definitely support my local leaders is what I would do.
Thank you, Alex. And Chris?
You're muted, Chris.
Looks like he's frozen.
Yeah.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, you're back.
Okay, sorry about that. Look, emergency powers usually is just consolidating power in an executive office at whatever level it is. Look, at the state level, that was obviously terrible. I mean, you know, Greg Abbott getting in the way of literally every COVID prevention measure we had. I am a teacher. I'm in the classroom, and they were telling us, you know, we can't require masks. We can't, you know, be notified if students are even tested positive. So that was a disaster there. But, you know, when we're talking about Clay Jenkins, you know, well, so at the state level, right, we need to be pushing for more local control. And on that note, people like Clay Jenkins, I'm glad that he had the power that he had to stand up to people like Greg Abbott and Hinojosa as well, to say, you know, defy these mandates from Abbott to say that we're going to put COVID measures in place. I think ultimately, if we want to reduce or move away from emergency powers, we have to get rid of the emergency, all right? And we're still sort of in emergency status. You know, we have COVID going on, and we have a lot of other, you know, economic and environmental emergencies as well that we need to address. And I think that's the only real way we can make sure that we get back to a normal life.
Thank you, Chris. And Kendall?
I believe that local governments know their communities best. And when we talk about executive powers, just like Chris mentioned earlier, I mean, we can't just pick which executives we like and say, great, Clay Jenkins gets to make all the executive decisions, but we don't want other folks to do it. We've got to find some line to be able to balance here. It is important, you know, if we had a responsible governor, for them to have been able to have the opportunity to step in and protect and save lives. Unfortunately, Greg Abbott chose to allow Texans to die on his watch. But I think that what Clay Jenkins and the work that he did here is commendable, and it's so important. Abbott realized that this was just a political pulpit for him, and he decided to put our lives at risk so that he could win a Democratic primary, and it was gross. And the legislature tried to act, but a lot of Republicans were stopping that. I think if we're going to have continue to have a political system that allows us to elect irresponsible folks, then we need to move in to start reining some of that in. But you've always got to make sure that you have some executive privilege there, so that if there is a hurricane, you don't have to call the legislature to meet to make all of these decisions, right? There's going to be a fine line to run there. Unfortunately, we have a petulant man-child as the governor of Texas.
Thank you, Kendall. John?
Kendall, I wish he was running in the Democratic primary, as you said, so I could vote against him. But I know you misspoke there.
My bad. I got all fired up. Sorry.
That's all right. I believe in executive mandates, and I think Clay Jenkins did an outstanding job and is a real hero. And I wish that someday he could move up because of that. But I think that any community ought to be able to exceed the mandate given by a timid or, as Kendall said, a political opportunist who happens to be governor at any given time. I believe in local decision-making with regard to the environment, local decision-making with regard to wages, if necessary, local decision-making in almost every area. I do not agree with the legislature's efforts to stop cities from being able to send their representative, a lobbyist, to Austin to keep a watch on what's happening there. I thought the when Denton decided to ban fracking, for example, Denton should have been allowed to do that. Instead, the state legislature turned Denton's decision around and said that they couldn't make that decision. That's the difference in Democrats and Republicans. That's the difference in progressive people and conservative people. We're progressives. We believe in people. And I think that has to apply to our discussion with regard to mandates.
Thank you, John. And Charlie?
Thanks, Elaine. As a proud lifelong Democrat, I've been scratching my head for the past couple of years about how Republicans have abandoned the proposition and the principle of local control. All of a sudden, we are now the defenders of local control. I think we unequivocally have to restore and defend local control. Everybody's talked about him. Clay Jenkins is the embodiment of effective local control. He was acting to protect our citizens, our families, our kids, and our schools. I'd also tell you that as a lawyer, you know, the principle of exceptions for public health emergencies are endemic to our law. They've been around for generations, no matter what Dan Patrick or Greg Abbott try to convince you of otherwise. So measures to protect folks, to try to open schools back up, open businesses back up, under the guise or under the authority of a public health emergency and emergency power, there's nothing wrong with that. This also extends beyond public health. Austin telling Dallas that we can't institute a living wage ordinance, for instance, is laughable. And it runs counter to most Republican ideology for decades. And so I guess we'll pick up the baton and we'll be the defenders of local control from now on.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. That was the last question for the forum, but I would like to now give everyone 2 minutes for a closing statement. If there's anything that you want to share that we didn't cover, anything that you want to reiterate. So everyone will get 2 minutes for their closing statement. And Chris, I'll start with you.
So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Feds, for hosting this forum and kicking off this forum season. We have a lot more of these to go. And so I'm glad the first one was with the Feds. And thank you, everyone, for joining, even though we're here virtually. This district provides a rare opportunity to elect a strong Democrat to represent Dallas and help move the party forward. As you've heard, not only is this a 2-to-1 blue district, means it's very strongly blue, it's also one of the rare minority opportunity districts that was created in this last gerrymandering session. That means that a majority of our district population is Hispanic, Black, and Asian Texans, and we should make sure we take this opportunity to elect someone who can represent that diversity. In this race, out of all these candidates, I am the only Dallas native in this race. I am the only Tejano in this race, the only public school teacher in this race, the only union member in this race, the only first-generation college graduate in this race, and as of now, the only candidate with an extensive policy platform with over 6 ideas to tackle the problems of our time. I also have a deep background in business, as we've seen, that has put me in these boardrooms and helped me manage $40 billion companies. And my approach to politics is firmly rooted in Texas pride and Texas history. If elected, I would become the youngest current member of the legislature. I know they tell candidates not to make promises. You can't break a promise you don't make. But to the voters of Dallas, I promise that if you take a chance on me, you will never regret it. I will fight every day to make you proud. My name is Chris Leal, and I'm running to be your next state representative from District 114. Check us out at lealfortexas.com. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Kendall?
Before I close, I do want to say one thing that we haven't gotten to today, and that's 246 Texans died last year because Greg Abbott chose not to do his job because the legislature didn't do their job, and they froze to death in their homes. We need to make sure that we send people who not only are interested in protecting our values, but that are having real discussions about the kitchen table issues like securing the grid. And that's something we weren't able to get to today. I'll fight to make sure that we do that. Look, I think that John has been making a really good argument as to why you should elect me this entire forum, when he has been telling you over and over again that you need to send someone that will lead the charge to get us a Democratic majority. You know I'll do it because you've seen me do it. I've been in the trenches knocking on doors with you. Together, we knocked on 70,000 doors to try to help get Democrats elected up and down the ballot. We flipped the 5th District Court of Appeals. We got rid of the last 2 JPs in Dallas County that wouldn't marry same-sex couples, and we helped flip 3 House seats. I started a PAC called Represent Texas, where I raised money and helped contribute to candidates all over the state. And I traveled around the state with Pod Bless Texas and my PAC to make sure that we were doing just that. You know I'll do it because you've seen me do it. It doesn't take me having to run for office to do that. I think that whoever holds this seat has to be a team player because, as you saw today, there's not a whole lot of daylight between us on a lot of these issues. But what there is a difference on, what I think shows that you can trust me in this fight, is that for the last 20 years, I have worked my tail end off to make sure that we are electing Democrats up and down this ballot. You know that if I go to Austin, I will stand firm on our values, not just because I'm sitting here at a forum telling you to do it, because I had beers with you when we formed the feds. I've been sitting here fighting with you for years, and I plan to continue doing that in the legislature. I also will add something that I had at the beginning. There are no affordable housing professionals in the entire legislature. I think I'd make you proud if you gave me a chance.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kendall. And John?
Thanks again to the feds for hosting this. I think it's very important to talk about another issue that hasn't come up tonight that I know we also all agree on, and that's the fact that the Trump Republican Party now is actively seeking to undermine our democratic system. At the same time, the Trump majority on the Supreme Court has just repealed a constitutional right that we've been able to rely upon for 50 years when they interrupted the ability of women to rely upon Roe versus Wade. This is a major crisis, and we have got to become very serious about our politics. We've got to start winning again. We've got to nominate people who are willing to raise money and campaign and travel the state to win back that majority. It's not just a matter of all of us gathering together here in District 114 where we all agree and talking about all the things we could do if only we were lucky enough to win. It's about going out there and winning. And then once you're there in the legislature, it's about being willing to lead the unpopular fights and raise the issues that somebody who's trying to build a resume or build a business or hoping to achieve election to higher office is not going to do. I've been there. I know exactly how it operates. I want to go down there and be willing to speak out to stop the proliferation of guns. I want to protect the LGBTQIA community in a meaningful way. I want to be able to see to it that women have the right to choose to get an abortion if in their judgment it is the right thing to do. All of these things depend on leadership, on a willingness to face down a Republican speaker, and more importantly, a willingness to go out and try to beat him with a Democratic majority that elected a Democratic speaker and let us put our progressive agenda to work. Thanks very much for allowing me to participate.
Thank you very much, John. And Charlie?
Elaine, I want to thank you and Joey and Jennifer and everybody else with the feds that hosted this fantastic forum tonight. Thank you so much for doing it so effectively and safely here in the virtual format. Guys, I wanted to just tell you a little bit more about myself. You've heard about policy positions tonight, but I'm an attorney. I'm a proud lifelong Democrat. And most importantly, my wife, Rachel, and I are your neighbors here in East Dallas in Casa Linda Forest, just off Buckner and Mercer. I'm running to represent you here in District 114, and I'm very proud to be endorsed by Wendy Davis and Ambassador Ron Kirk. Wendy and Ambassador Kirk have endorsed me because they know I'm going to get to work serving my neighbors in Austin and nothing else. Because I come from a family that taught me that there's nothing more important than doing that, than caring for and serving our neighbors. My granddad was a Southern Baptist minister who was run out of town after town because he preached and fought for integration back in the 50s and 60s. I grew up here in DFW after I was born at Medical City Hospital over off Forest Lane with my granddad a mile down the street. He taught me to never back down from a tough fight. He pushed me to go to law school so I could stand up to injustice and so I could stand up for my neighbors. After law school, I moved back to East Dallas, and I've been working in this community and for my neighbors ever since. I've worked to serve our neighbors experiencing homelessness. I fought for a more equal and inclusive Dallas for my LGBTQ plus neighbors, and I've ensured greater access to free legal services for all my neighbors here in Dallas. Almost 7 years ago, I met my brilliant wife, Rachel, volunteering to help homeless veterans at the VA Resource Center in Southern Dallas. And ever since then, service has been the foundation of our family. We've tried to put our legal training to work for others, going to the convention center in 2017 to advise victims of Hurricane Harvey. Throughout 2020, I helped my neighbors stay in their homes as they faced eviction during the pandemic. And years ago, I founded a program that made legal services more accessible to every Dallas site. And in that program, lawyers in that program provided over 4,300 hours of pro bono legal services. Thanks, Jennifer. Thanks, everybody. Check us out at gearingfortexas.com.
Thank you very much, Charlie and Alex.
Well, thank y'all so much, Feds, for organizing. Thank you, everyone, for being here, because that means that we are all committed into this and to making sure that we make democracy work. I think that what I want to make sure that everyone walks away with about this district is focusing on this community. It is a brand new district. It is rich with diversity. It is rich with people who want to finally have a voice in Austin. And so that's why I know that I am the best fit to lead this district if we focus on the people. And that's why I'm running, is to amplify voices and issues that have been ignored for far too long. I know that my life experiences, my professional experiences as a prosecutor, as a legislative liaison, and my over decades of work as an activist here in Dallas make me the best fit to lead this community here in House District 114. I'm also a bilingual candidate. My website is bilingual. I have literature that's bilingual. I have a field team that's bilingual. And the reason that that is important is because if we invest in this community, it is an untapped resource, not only for House District 114, but for ballot races up and down in this primary, but also for the general. Imagine if we can invest in this for races like Lieutenant Governor, Attorney General, and for the governor races. And I am the only candidate that can tap into this untapped resource. Not only that, half this district belonged to House District 108 with a representative who did not want to give them a voice, and I want to be that voice for them. I also believe that when knocking in doors, people are just hopeless, and I believe that my life experiences, my enthusiasm can spark that hope and reignite this idea that we all have a voice here in this democracy. My party, my campaign is about inclusion, is about positivity, and I know that all of this combined make me the best candidate to lead this new House District 114 that is rich with diversity. It would be an honor to earn your support. Thank you, Feds, so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, all the candidates. Thank you for your great timekeeping, Jennifer. You did an excellent job. And
thank you, Elaine. You did a great job moderating. And thank you to all the candidates for being so nice and respectful to each other. And it made my job so easy. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you to the Feds and the ops teams and Joey and Trisha and Rosie. I do want to say that I know for a fact, because every single one of these candidates has reached out to me personally. I have not been able to talk to them, not all of them, most of them, but not all of them personally yet. But if you have other questions, if you have things that, because Texas has a lot of problems, if you have a lot of other things that you want to know specifically what they feel about, I know for a fact that if you reach out to them, they will get back in touch with you. They're all very responsive. So we have some great candidates. So again, thank you very much. And I really appreciate everyone's time. And have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Feds.
Thanks, y'all.
Go Team Blue.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Mary, who probably has already bounced, will be very pleased that it is 8:00 when we are shutting her down.
Wow. I did that. I did that for her.
Yeah. There's Mary.
She loves it. She loves it.
Mary, we're ending at 8 for you. Christy?
Good job, you guys.
Hey, Christy.
Are you off duty tonight, boss? Okay. Okay. Totally fair.